You are entering a Sacred Yes transmission, a real-time frequency broadcast from the Temple of Remembrance. These messages arrive as they are received, raw, unedited, alive. Listen to the part of you that already knows. Listen to the part of you that broadcasts your life into being. The transmission begins now. Transmission. So today, I'm sitting with something that isn't talked about very often. It's one of the most tender and least named passages of remembering, especially for women who heal, guide, teach, hold space, or midwife transformation for others. Why this isn't talked about, but it needs to be, is that most conversations about growth focus on finding your voice, claiming your truth, setting boundaries, stepping into purpose. But almost no one stays with the relational cost of integration. Not the dramatic endings, not the obvious betrayals, but the quiet reconfiguration of when you're no longer the same listener. When you stop organizing yourself around others' pain. When your presence changes the temperature of the room. And when you're no longer the one who knows what to say. I don't think that it's loss. I think it's identity relocation. And it affects every relationship that you're devoted to. The unspoken question beneath all of this is that who am I with you now that I'm no longer performing who I used to be? This question terrifies people, and I totally get it. It terrifies me, not because love is gone, but because the old relational choreography no longer works. The nervous system can't rely on familiar roles, and your presence replaces predictability. And presence, let's be honest, is vulnerable. What changes when a woman remembers herself? When you remember who you are, friendships don't automatically end, but they do change dimension. Here are a few possibilities. A friendship deepens because it can finally rest. A friendship softens because it no longer needs intensity. A friendship becomes less frequent, but more honest. Or a friendship completes itself, not in anger, but in gratitude. And what's really important is this: none of these outcomes mean that the love was false. It just means that the form is adjusting to the truth. And the part healers and coaches are rarely prepared for. This is something essential. When you've spent years developing insight, pattern recognition, emotional literacy, the ability to hold suffering, there's a moment when you realize, I don't know how to just be here without doing something with this. And that moment can feel like incompetence, but it's not. It's the shedding of function in favor of presence. And it's terrifying because you can't hide behind usefulness. You can't guarantee outcomes. You can't preempt the pain. You're just there. Becoming changes relationships, not because you've outgrown love, but because love asks to meet you differently now. Standing still is not abandonment, it's an invitation. You don't need to know how every friendship will evolve to remain devoted. Devotion does not mean preserving form. It means honoring truth. Integration includes grief, uncertainty, and the loss of old roles. You're allowed to learn how to be without performing care. I think women everywhere are thinking, why does this feel so awkward now? Why don't I know what to say anymore? Why does growth feel lonely sometimes? Why am I grieving friendships I still love? It's because we think it's a failure. But what it actually is a relational rite of passage. When remembering changes the shape of love. There is a passage that no one prepares you for. Not when you awaken, not when you heal, not when you finally remember who you are. It is the moment you realize that remembering yourself does not only liberate you, it quietly, irrevocably rearranges your relationships. Not in dramatic ways, not in clean endings or obvious betrayals, not in explosions or declarations, but in subtle pauses, in not knowing what to say anymore, in feeling different inside conversations you used to know by heart. This is the part we don't talk about, especially not as women, especially not as healers, guides, coaches, space holders, listeners, and companions, especially not as women who have survived by being attuned, available, insightful, helpful, and emotionally fluent. We talk about boundaries, we talk about sovereignty, we talk about some people can't come with you. But we don't talk about what it's like when you want them to come with you and you don't know how to walk together anymore. There is grief in remembering. Not because you regret remembering, but because you can now see what you couldn't see before. You can see the roles you played, the ways you performed care instead of inhabiting your own presence, the moments you guided when you didn't yet trust yourself enough to simply stay. You can see where you overfunctioned, where you intervened, where you tried to help someone into their own wholeness before you knew how to hold your own. And seeing this hurts. Not because you were wrong, but because you were doing the best you could with the capacity that you had. And now you have more capacity, which creates a strange kind of sorrow. I would do this differently now. I didn't know how to be then. I didn't know who I was. This grief is not shame. It is development made visible. It is frequency coming online. Remembering changes the nervous system of connection. When you remember yourself, your nervous system reorganizes. You stop anticipating. You stop rehearsing. You stop managing outcomes. You stop translating people's pain into meaning fast enough to keep the bond intact. You stop earning belonging. And suddenly the whole choreography doesn't work. The pauses are longer. The words are fewer. The silence is louder. You don't know what to say, not because you lack the wisdom or the emotion, but because you no longer want to use it as currency. This can feel terrifying, especially if connection once depended on your insight or emotional labor, your availability, or your ability to hold everyone else together. When those fall away, the question emerges: who am I with you now that I am no longer performing care? This question has no immediate answer, and it wasn't meant to. Standing still is a radical act. Most of us were taught, explicitly or implicitly, that love requires motion. Fixing, responding, explaining, soothing, doing something with what's shared. Standing still feels like abandonment. And the deeper truth? Standing still is only abandonment if your worth was tied to intervention. When you stand still now, you're not withdrawing love. You are refusing to replace presence with performance. This is not cold. This is not selfish. This is not spiritual bypassing. This is integrity. Not all friendships are meant to stay the same. And this is the hardest truth to hold gently. Love does not guarantee sameness. Devotion does not guarantee form. Some friendships will deepen because they can finally rest. Some will soften because they no longer need intensity. Some change rhythm without losing intimacy, and some complete without blame or rupture. Completion is not failure. Change is not betrayal. And wanting a friendship to continue does not mean you're responsible for preserving it exactly as it was. Remembering asks something braver of us. Can we let the relationship discover what it wants to be now? Without forcing, without forecasting, without fear-driven adjustment. For the healers, the coaches, the space holders, there is a unique fear here. When you have trained yourself to see patterns, to recognize suffering, to know what helps, there comes a moment when you realize, I don't know how to just be here anymore. That moment is not incompetence. It is the shedding of function. You're not losing your gifts. You're learning when not to deploy them. You're learning that presence does not require solutions, that love does not require interpretation, that listening does not require direction. This is advanced work, and it is deeply uncomfortable. You are not alone in this passage. There are women everywhere sitting quietly with this grief. Women who love their friends. Women who don't want to disappear. Women who don't want to dominate. Women who are learning how to remain without managing. They wonder, why does this feel awkward? Why don't I know what to say? Why does growth sometimes feel lonely? Why am I grieving friendships that aren't over? They think something's wrong with them. And nothing is wrong. This is a relational rite of passage. You don't need to know where anything is going. You don't need to get it right. You don't need to audit your past. You do not need to perfect your presence. You only need to trust this. You are allowed to become and remember without disappearing. You are allowed to love without performing. You are allowed to stand still without fixing. You are allowed to grieve without collapsing. You are allowed to let friendships evolve or soften or complete without making yourself wrong. If this transmission has found you, let it reassure you. You're not selfish. You're not failing at love. There is nothing wrong with you. You're learning how to be with instead of for. And that learning takes time, silence, and a whole lot of tenderness. So stay. There's nothing you need to do right now. This chamber is now complete. Take a breath and return to yourself with new clarity. Your remembering does not end here. It continues in every step, every breath, every choice, every broadcast you make. Thank you for entering this field. The next transmission will find you when you're ready.